Hello and welcome to a new rapid chess video. I'm going to play a 10-minute game with no increment. And I have the black pieces against Shuko Komi. 2409. So we have transposed back into a Jobava London. I mean transposed d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, bishop f4 could have been another move order. I go c5, which is one of many options that are available, and c takes d4. Now, knight to b5 can be an idea. It is actually definitely an idea. If I play a move like knight to c6 after knight b5, I'm already losing, I believe. So I'm going to play the move pawn to a6 or bishop to g4, which are the moves that I know a bit about. a6. Bishop g4 was another move, which aim was to be able to quickly develop the queen side and not have to worry about any knight b5. Okay, knight to c6. And if allowed, I will go bishop to g4. And if not, I also have the f5 square potentially to occupy with my light squared bishop before closing the structure with e7 to e6. Okay, so my opponent prevented bishop to g4, and my idea was to go for this move. Bishop to f5. And sometimes people who play this Jobava London go for g4 and h4 stuff, but if black reacts well enough, it is supposed to just be some sort of weakening of the king side. So, okay, we have traded a pair of minor pieces, and I could try to exchange another one with bishop to d6, which also controls an important square here on e5, which my opponent just landed on with his knight. I like to move queen to c7, adding some extra pressure against this knight on e5. I could just castle. Queen to c7 threatens to win a pawn with knight takes, bishop takes, and winning at the end. And after knight takes c6, I think I would have taken the bishop. That knight would have been a bit strange on c6. Now I have different options. I could keep my king in the center for the time being and play something like rook to c8 maybe. But I don't really see any reason not to hide on g8 with my king. So, short castle. And in general, what we are trying to highlight with black in this sort of positions in the Jobava London is that the knight on c3 could be a bit detrimental to white's position in the sense that the pawn on c2 is blocked. Knight to b4 could have been an issue for white maybe, so he played a3. Also bishop to b4 in some cases. So now this is something that is prevented on my part, but I also have the c4 square, which I can try to occupy with something like knight to a5, because now that this move has been played, this sort of weakens the queen side a bit, even though this secures the b4 square for now. So if I go something like knight to a5, rook to c8, and put the knight here, and he has to play b3, this whole configuration would start looking a bit strange. And you would maybe prefer to have a bishop on b2 to cover this area of the board. I like the move rook a to c8. If he moves the bishop somewhere, I can just win a pawn here. This is still a valuable factor. I like bishop takes. Couldn't take with the knight because there would have been a fork after pawn takes. Both my knight and bishop would have been hanging. Now I'm taking this one. And knight to d7. I'm trying to get my knight to another nice square. And yes, with that pawn on a3 now, which is something which didn't make much sense at the time, but now it could be a factor. If I get my knight to c4 and he gets b3 in, then the pawn on a3 would be hanging. Maybe he wants rook to d4. Or rook here. For now the pawn on e5 is well secured. I like the move f5, maybe. If he takes en passant, I can take here. This. And no, I'm not a fan of the fact that I have to take with the rook not to lose material. Maybe rook here first. And maybe I can prepare f6 or f5. f5 most likely. And on rook d4 I have f5, which prevents rook g4. Okay. So here I wanted to play this move. And if something like rook to h4, maybe knight to f8 to secure my kingside. Go for this. Okay, he just gives a check. Knight to f6 looks like a very good square. I can try to push my pawn at some point. For now I need to protect the pawn on d5 more than that. This could just be a trade as well. If I go e5 and he captures, at the end there will be c2 hanging, but this would probably just lead to simplifications. And there's still some life in the position. I have central pawns. If I go e5 now, attacking the rook, rook f5. If I go something like d4, he can maybe get his knight here. Trying to trade this knight. And also threatening to invade on d6. So I'm going to keep my pawn on d5 for the time being. And maybe get my king to d6. As long as I'm not blundering any tactics here, should be fine. d6 would be a very nice square for the king if I manage to accomplish that. Okay, king to d6. Hitting the rook, and now I think e5 makes a lot more sense with the king supporting my center. Pawn to d4. And if knight to e4, I want to trade and win the pawn on c2. And if rook f7, I come back with rook c7 at the end, protecting my 7th rank in my second one. Rook back. If he trades, this is just probably easily winning, because I have two big central pawns, connected pass pawns. So he has to keep both rooks on the board to try to save it. I have this though, which is going to win material, because the rook has to protect the other one. Now he has to prevent the promotion, and I win the rook at the end. Okay, let's have a little look. So Jobava London. c5 is not the only move, but this is one that I learned about maybe even 10 years ago, maybe a bit less. Jan Gustafsson, Grandmaster from Germany, and the head of Chess24 at the time, was publishing some material covering full black repertoire against d4, and this was his recommendation against the Jobava London. Bishop g4 is another move. I played a6, which is the line I have played a bit more. Knight to f3, knight to c6. I assume bishop to g4 is also okay, but I don't really fear not being able to develop my bishop to this square. Knight to c6. I know that knight to e5 is a possibility, after which we go bishop to d7, which is a bit of a strange move, but works well enough. And against any other move in the game, he played h3, which prevented bishop g4. Against something like bishop to e2, we can go one of those squares. Both are fine. Considering there's already a bishop breaking a potential pin on this diagonal, I like putting it on f5 better. And in case of bishop to d3, we cannot go bishop f5, so by process of elimination we can go bishop to g4. He played h3, I played bishop to f5, bishop d3, takes, e6. This is just about equal. The knight is weirdly placed on c3, but white has a good development, so this is still okay for both sides. He castled and I developed my bishop to d6. This is not the only square for the bishop, but this is the simplest way to play. Offering a trade, my opponent declined it, at least for the time being, and I played queen c7, adding some pressure here and sort of forcing a rook to get to e1, because after something like knight to c6 I would happily take on f4, and the knight is still hanging and it doesn't really have a good place to go to. For instance, after something like this, the knight is very strange, and white is having two strangely placed knights on this side of the board. Okay, he played rook f to e1. I guess putting this square made a bit more sense, considering his play is supposed to come from this side, so at some point he might want to play with f4, in which case the rook on f1 would be better placed. But okay, the difference might not be all that important. Rook f e1, short castle, a3. I played rook to c8. There was a game here. I spoke about Chess24, Melanie Lube. I'm sorry if I mispronounce it. Was also creating material for Chess24 Germany, I believe. And she had this position with the white pieces, and her opponent played knight to d7. I played rook a to c8. Both moves are fine, I guess. Rook a to d1. And I decided to take, which is a simple option, but far from the only one. I also hesitated a bit to play something like this, knight to e7, get my queen back here, and try to get my knight to d6 with something like knight to f5, bishop e7, and knight d6, which is something that you kind of see in the London system. Okay, I took on a5. As I said, I couldn't take with the knight because after pawn takes... What? Okay, I took with the bishop, and bishop takes, knight takes. This just led to some simplifications, but when it comes to the pawn structure, I really like my position. Knight to g7, queen to g3, protecting the pawn on e5. And yes, here I played rook f to e8. I wonder... At first I was thinking about the move f5, but after pawn takes, queen to g3, fg, the fact that I had to protect this one would have forced me to take on f6 with the rook, and I was not happy with having my rook on f6. So I started with rook f to e8, so that on f5, pawn takes, queen g3, fg3, I can just take with the pawn or the knight, and my pawn on e6 is already secured. Queen to b6 was a better move apparently, hitting the pawn on b2 and trying to force some weakening from white. I played this. Okay, he played rook to d4, which is the move that I had anticipated, and I answered it with f5. And now, okay, it was kind of clear with rook d4 that he wanted to get it to either g4 or h4, and after f5, first I'm removing this possibility from him, and against rook h4 I could have just played something like knight to f8. So this is a very comfortable position for me. He took on f6, so knight to f6 was a possibility, but my idea was to trade queens and get those central pawns. Okay, he gave a check because I guess that was fun. Fg, knight to f6, g4. He wants to make my knight move, but I have h6, which at least will force him to lose even more time to get the move g5 in. He played rook to f4, and yeah, I decided to bring my king closer to the center, which was good. Rook to e5, this was just a loss of a tempo. Yeah, his position is very difficult because he has to deal with those central pawns which are going to advance. Rook to e5, king to d6, and the rook has to go back. Rook to e1, and I push d5. And yes, rook f5 loses. What should he play? Rook f2, yeah, so that in case of d4 the pawn on c2 is protected. But he's on the defensive for sure. Rook f5 d4, and this just loses material. I took, rook takes, rook c2, he played rook f7, rook c7. As I said, he cannot trade because after king takes I'm just going to bring my king back up and the rook will be attacked, and even if the king manages to get here or there somehow, my rook will enter. If the king gets to d3, okay, I'm going to do nice arrows. If the king gets to d3, my rook will enter via the f-file, and if the king stops by on f3, I will enter on the c-file, while my king, in any case, will sit very nicely on the d5 square. We were at this point. Nope. Rook c7, rook f2, king d5, and d3. And yeah, this was the problem. I'm attacking the rook. My last move was attacking the rook, and after this d3, the rook has to keep protecting the 4 rook. So in case of something like this, I just take the rook, and in case of rook to e1, I can keep pushing. And if rook e2, I just promote, and same thing against rook to d1, I can take the rook. So my opponent resigned after this. Okay, that was a good one. I hope you enjoyed this Jobava London from the black perspective, and thank you for watching.